Pokemon Sword and Shield are notorious for being too easy, but what if you were forced to use the very Pokemon that are mocked? I put this to the test by doing a hardcore Nuzlocke using only Dittos. All the rules I use are in the description, but to summarize, if a Pokemon faints, it's no longer usable. I can only catch the first encounter on a route. I play on set mode. I can't use items in battle, but held items are fine. I can't level past the next gym leader's ace. And I can only use the same number of Pokemon as the gym leader. Also specifically for this game, I won't be Dynamaxing my Pokemon and I won't be visiting any DLC locations. And finally for this challenge, I'm only allowed to use Dittos. Well, turning every encounter into a Ditto was proving to be pretty tedious, so instead I turned Route 1 into a Ditto breeding ground. Do Dittos even breed with themselves? Mitosis maybe? And for every encounter I get, I'll just catch another Ditto. Also, all of these Dittos will have the imposter ability, otherwise this challenge will be pretty much impossible. Sounds simple enough, but let me explain to you a few details. When Ditto transforms, it also copies its target stats. Not just the base stats, but literally the exact stats that Pokemon has at the time, along with any stat changes. However, the one stat Ditto does keep is its HP, and it's bad. Which means we'll likely always be at a disadvantage, with the one thing that we can control being the items that our Dittos hold. Not the best situation to be in when you're doing a hardcore Nuzlocke where you have a limited number of encounters. But that's that, so let's get started. Leon offers as a starter, and I decided to go for Sobble this time as I rarely ever use it. Sobble looks slightly different from what I remember, but we'll love it all the same. Sobble now looks completely different, but we all have our quirks. I'm able to get past Wooloo, but with only 5 power points and 1 Ditto, Scorbunny brutally tortures Sobble until it gives in to struggle. Well, my Nuzlocke don't start until I get Pokeballs, so let's move on. Also, here's a quick look on what most of my wild encounters are going to look like. Further into the woods, Sobble is able to actually transform into Question Mark. Makes complete sense, but I wasn't really expecting it. Also, fun fact, based around its moveset, it seems that this Question Mark is leveled around 22. Sobble transforms into Sobble to draw less attention. After getting some Pokeballs, the Nuzlocke begins. We get our first few encounters, Rookidee the Ditto and Zigzagoon the Ditto. I won't be showing you most of my random trainer battles just because of how long they can be, but this battle against Blipbug is a good demonstration of how many of my battles will go. The only move this Blipbug has is Struggle Bug, which lowers the opponent's special attack. So now we're both using the same moves, lowering each other's stats every turn until both of us start doing 1 damage a turn, and I can't even switch out to remove the drops. The hot battle is basically a tackle mirror match where we win simply because we're holding orange berries. This is how most of my hot battles will go, so I'll be skipping most of them. I don't think anyone will mind. Onwards to the wild area, we get a whole bunch of encounters. Here I catch Vanillite the Ditto, Oddish the Ditto, Timpole the Ditto, Machop the Ditto, Mudbray the Ditto, and the Ditto from the Wedgehurst station who I call Slowpoke. Okay, I promise I won't do that again. We become a member of Team Yell, register for the gym challenge, and have another tackle standoff against Hop. Even easier thanks to having a full team this time. And make our ways to the mine to challenge Bead. Bead sends out Solosis, which Sobble transforms into. All we can do is use Confusion. Sobble moves second, but his Confusion manages to confuse Solosis on the first turn. Another Confusion later, Solosis uses Endeavor, but an Orange Berry takes Sobble out of crit range. One more Confusion, then Solosis finishes itself off. And that was probably a better way to word that. Hatenna comes out to use a round, which crits. This actually works in my favor as Sobble uses Endeavor, bringing Hatenna down to 5 HP. I switch into Mudbray on round, and after getting hit with another round, its own round takes Hatenna out. Gothita starts off with a Tickle, and Mudbray uses Round. I switch into Rookidee as Gothita uses Pound. We trade a Psybeam, but Rookidee manages to crit, then Confuse. After a while, Gothita loses the Psybeam contest. That one was slightly more entertaining than Hop, right? Yeah, I'll probably skip Beat from now on as well. But with that, we're ready to challenge the first gym. Before Milo, I can get 3 more Dittos, and I bring my 3rd and 4th best ones. Like I mentioned before, the only thing that determines that is their HP. And this ends up being Sobble and Woobat. Milo starts off with Gossifleur, and there's not really much I can do but use Round. I do use a Rapid Spin so I can move first, however I quickly realized that this was a mistake as Round increases in power the more it's used during the same turn. Thanks to the Orange Berry, I'm able to win the round match, but we still have to deal with Eldegoss who Dynamaxes. I send out Woobat as Eldegoss Dynamaxes, and it uses Max Strike, not doing too much. But that only means that I'll do less. The next turn, however, Eldegoss goes for a Max Overgrowth, not only doing very little damage, but also giving Woobat a way to recover its HP. I decide to switch out for the final turn of Dynamax, but wait a sec. Sobble has more HP. I should have known this, but it turns out both of Milo's Pokemon have Regenerator, an ability that restores a third of your HP on switching out. With this knowledge and still having access to both of my Dittos, Eldegoss becomes a joke, and a few rounds later, we get our first badge. This may have been an easy boring match, but it doesn't bode too well for the future as Regenerator is not a thing that we'll ever have access to again. And this is the point where Pokemon are starting to exceed Ditto's pitiful 48 base HP stat, which brings us to the second gym. I bring Woobat, Tympole, and Milcery. Nessa leads with Goldeen and wins the speed tie using Horn Attack, and I use one of my own. This time we both read each other and use Agility. Next I go for Whirlpool to do some passive damage while Goldeen hits a Horn Attack. And after training a few more Horn Attacks, Woobat comes out the victor. On Arrokuda, Woobat starts off with a Whirlpool while Arrokuda hits a Bite. A Horn Attack later, I switch into Tympole. Tympole uses Bite as Arrokuda flinches and an Aqua Jet finishes it off. But these Pokemon weren't the ones I was worried about. Out comes Dreadnought, a Pokemon that will Dynamax and has stabs neutral to itself. I switch out to Woobat as Dreadnought Dynamaxes and it goes for a Max Strike, taking Woobat out. I just gave Dreadnought a free turn. Back into Tympole and it wins the speed tie, only to miss the Razor Shell. Dreadnought uses Max Geyser and that actually does way less than I thought. That's because this Dreadnought for some reason has both Razor Shell and Water Gun. Tympole loses the speed tie and goes down to a second Max Geyser, and Dreadnought returns to normal. Milcery moves first, hitting a rain boosted Razor Shell doing over half, and Dreadnought does the same, but doing even more damage. All I can do is hope that I'll win the coin flip, but of course Dreadnought moves first. Missing the Razor Shell, then Milcery misses its Razor Shell. The next turn, Milcery moves first, hitting the Razor Shell, bringing Dreadnought down and earning us the second badge. Only the second gym in and my heart was pounding. I honestly don't see any other way of winning this battle other than winning multiple coin flips in a row, and it's only going to get worse from here. Rose invites us to lunch and then sticks us with the bill, thus beginning his villain arc. The bead battle isn't too interesting as it's just a repeat of the last battle except this time with a Ponyta. But we have a much more horrifying battle just a bit up ahead. One I never even considered planning for. These two Team Yell grunts right here. Thievul and Linoon can't really do much, but the real horror show starts when Pancham comes out. In a double battle, Ditto transforms into the Pokemon directly opposite it. In this battle, it's either going to be Thievul or Liepard, both of which have absolutely no moves that can do any meaningful damage to Pancham. Not to mention, Liepard and Thievul go down to a single low sweep from Pancham. Of course, alongside that, Hop is as useless as ever. Demonstrated here where he has the Corvisquire out and decides to use multiple flying moves on the Liepard instead of the still alive fighting type Pancham. This battle is in memory of Zigzagoon and Mudbray. Back in Motorstoke, we have battle against Marnie. We start with Venom-shocking back and forth that eventually takes down Krogunk, and then the still healthy Throw is able to make quick work of Scraggy with Revenge. I try the same strategy on Morpeko, but it uses Bite, which flinches Throw. Switching into Rookidee, Quick Attack crits. Interestingly, despite Rookidee having transformed, its ability doesn't work the same as Morpeko. After trading a few bites, I switch into Oddish and finally bring Morpeko down. I may have skimmed over this battle, but this is what my team looked like afterwards. Marnie has by far been the hardest rival battle so far. It's now time for Kabu. I bring Milcery, Sobble, and Throw. Kabu sends out Ninetales and the only thing either of us can do is use Quick Attack as this Ninetales has Flash Fire. After 9 turns of Quick Attack and a switch, I'm finally able to take Ninetales down. Out comes Arcanine and the first thing I do is switch into Throw. This triggers an Intimidate on Arcanine, and while I do copy its stat changes, whenever I switch from now on, it will always be on a lower stage than me. After which, we both hit each other with Bite, and then both use Agility. Twice. I then realize that I have no need to use it since I can just copy its stats and go for a Bite, as Arcanine uses yet another Agility. After many bites and many flinches, Arcanine goes down, but now it's time to face another Dynamax. I stay in to use a Bite doing minimal damage, and Center Scorch uses Max Flutterby doing a lot of damage. I switch into Throw to waste another turn of Dynamax, next sending out Milcery. I'm honestly unsure what I'm supposed to do here, so I use a Bug Bite just to see how much damage it can actually do. Max Flutterby brings Milcery into red. Center Scorch returns to normal and wins the next speed tie and brings Milcery down with Bug Bite. I don't think the crit mattered. I use a futile smoke screen and a coil later, Center Scorch uses a Bug Bite, finishing off Sobble, and I lose my first run. Kabu honestly was not where I was expecting this run to end, and based on Center Scorch's moveset, I'm struggling to think of a reliable strategy. Well, during my second run, I actually had a small realization that would shift the majority of battles in my favor. In the wild area, there isn't really a limitation on where we can go, and while we can't catch Pokemon, we can grab items, and more importantly, interact with berry trees. On the Motorstoke Riverbank and the Bridgefield, we can get both citrus berries and leper berries, so yeah. While it doesn't sound like a big deal, having that extra HP during a mirror match means that we don't have to rely winning on speed ties as much. This helped me keep my Pokemon healthier for Nessa's Dreadnought, but I still do have to rely on some luck. Hop was also much kinder this time and actually took out the Pancham before it took any of my Pokemon. Back onto Kabu, this time I bring Machop, Lotad, and Magikarp. We have a war of attrition with Ninetales and Arcanine with all my Pokemon still alive. Centiskorch is out and I spend the first 3 turns sacrificing Machop and Lotad so the Dynamax can end. Magikarp also had to take a hit, but its Citrus Berry was able to recover back most of its HP. And now for my big brain plan. I just spam Coil. Yup, that's simple. And there is actually something else going on here. As Coil increases attack, defense, and accuracy, this baits Kabu into using smoke screens and coils of his own. I actually do try to get a smoke screen off myself, but of course it misses. Back to Coil. Eventually I use as many as I can and Kabu copies the trend himself. Now's my chance to attack. Centiskorch has Flash Fire, so I use Bug Bite to test the waters, and it does about a quarter. That means I can only afford to miss one. Magikarp moves first, hitting a Bug Bite, putting Centiskorch under half, and it uses Smoke Screen, putting Magikarp at -1 accuracy. It doesn't stop though, as Centiskorch wins the next speed tie, once again hitting Smoke Screen, -2 accuracy. And Magikarp misses Bug Bite. Only 2 left and I need to hit both of them. Kabu wastes a turn by using a Bug Bite of his own, and Magikarp hits. One more turn, and Magikarp wins the speed tie, hitting its last Bug Bite, taking Centiskorch down. I'm honestly not too sure I can make this battle more consistent. Having another Pokemon alive would help immensely to get more chances to attack, but how is the piece of the puzzle I can't quite figure out. This is one of those battles which would be a non-issue if he brought a full team, but hey, that's why I included the rule. It makes battles like these more interesting. Anyway, that's a win, so onwards to Hammerlock. In the wild area, I'm able to replenish my Dittos and get even more. On Route 6, we have a very interesting forced battle with Beauty Anita. You see, Anita has 2 Pokemon, Clefairy and Clefable, both of which only have Metronome, which means I can only use Metronome. Rookity starts off strong, landing an Aeroblast, and Clefairy does about the same amount of damage, but with a nice punch. Clefairy moves again using a Defend Order, and Rookity rolls an Eruption. Rookity takes a break using high horsepower, and the only way Clefairy sees the win is cheating by using Spore. I switch into Yamper on the sticky webs and looks like the tides are turning. But Yamper wants to end this with a bang and uses a head charge to take the remaining 5 HP from Clefairy. Clefable comes out, so I switch into Krogunk, and after it uses a Giga Impact while Clefable lands an Oblivion Wing. This battle becomes painfully mediocre and ends with a whimper as Clefable struggles to death. The start of this battle had me considering doing a Metronome-only Nuzlocke, and the latter half reminded me why that would be a horrible idea. That Clefable battle alone lasted 5 minutes. I still intend to avoid showing random battles, but I needed a break before the battle that I'm dreading the most. That of course being Alistair. This gym uses Ghost types, a type that is super effective against itself, and none of Alistair's Pokemon are even neutral to it. The only thing we can do is basically hope that his terrible AI from my last Shield Nuzlocke returns, and hope that we win speed ties during critical moments. Aside from that, Citrus Berries might help, but that's me coping. Thankfully the gym trainers have pretty bad AI as they opt not to use their ghost moves for some reason. Aside from this trainer's Drifblim who only has ghost moves. Drifblim uses a Phantom Force to take my poor sweet Magikarp from me. For Alistair, I bring Yamper, Mudbray, Minccino, and Basculin. Leading with Yamask, Alistair uses a Premature Disable as Yamper uses a Hex. I use a Brutal Swing the next turn to save Hex from being disabled, and we trade Wandering Spirits for some reason. Yamask goes for Hex anyway. Yamper moves first again and takes Yamask out with another Hex. Cursola's out next and has an insane special attack stat, and I need a clean switch, so goodbye Yamper. Cursola takes half her HP with Curse, and Mudbray helps her finish the job with Hex. Mimikyu comes out and it's actually pretty annoying to deal with as its ability grants it a free hit. Shadow Sneak does a lot of damage and I figure the best way to deal with this is by using Curse. But this unfortunately means Mudbray goes down. I decide to break Mimikyu's disguise using Shadow Sneak, but he beats me to the punch and actually does damage? Turns out that like Morpeko, even disguise doesn't work the same way with the Ditto. I'm not sure if Shadow Sneak will do the job, so I go for Hone Claws, but Mimikyu thinks ahead to use a Baby Doll Eyes. Curse damage will take Mimikyu out this turn anyway, so I go for a Hone Claws, but Mimikyu reads me again using Baby Doll Eyes. Mimikyu goes down and Gengar comes out. Gengar Dynamaxes, and I figured the least I could do is get a hit in with the Shadow Sneak, and it does about a quarter, as we say goodbye to Minccino. I send out my final Pokemon Basculin, and I'm honestly not even sure what I can do to turn this around. But then I see a narrow ray of hope. Very narrow. Basculin actually wins the speed tie, but then misses Hypnosis. But then Gengar goes for a Max Darkness coming off a physical attack, and Basculin manages to survive. I try one more time. Basculin once again wins the speed tie, and also gets off the Hypnosis, and the Dynamax ends. Basculin moves first for the third time and hits Hex, putting an end to Gengar and getting us the 4th badge on our first try. I'll be honest, there was an insane amount of luck involved, at least for the battle with Gengar. I can think of a few more ways to get through the first 3 Pokemon a bit more consistently, but I'm honestly stumped about what to do for Gengar. I'm dreading when I inevitably have to do this battle again. Before moving on to the next gym, I grab a letter from a young girl and bring it to an old man. A bit creepy, but gives me a choice scarf to buy my silence. Imagine how useful this could have been just a gym earlier. I also grab an Eviolite, but its usefulness has pretty much run its course. Could help with random battles though. For Opal, I bring Sobble, Rhyhorn, Sinistea, and Cutiefly. We start the battle trading sludges, then Opal kindly gives me a speed boost to guarantee our win against Weezing. Opal sends out her only good Pokemon. Sobble can move first and gets off a sludge, poisoning Togekiss, but Togekiss's Air Slash is able to finish off Sobble. Togekiss moves first, hitting an Ancient Power doing surprisingly little, and Rhyhorn does the same. The damage from poison leaves Togekiss on a sliver of health. The next turn, Rhyhorn's able to move first, hitting a Draining Kiss to take Togekiss down. Morwell has a terrible moveset, so I can keep using Air Slashes until it goes down. Also during this time, Rhyhorn gets a defense and attack boost. All the damage Alcremie can do to Rhyhorn is healed back by Draining Kiss until eventually she too goes down. If they gave Opal a gimmick which can grant the player stat buffs, why not at least give her a decent team? Before moving on to the next gym, we have another battle with Hop, and I'll actually give him the spotlight this time. Hop leads with Trevenant, and Rhyhorn gets to move first using Shadow Claw, but misses the kill. Trevenant does the same, doing a lot of damage, so there's no way I can switch. I stay in with Rhyhorn, and it manages to outspeed, taking Trevenant down with another Shadow Claw. Next up is Cinderace, so I switch into Sinistea on Pyro Ball. I slowly whittle down Cinderace's HP, as all it does is use Agility. But then he hits hard with Acrobatics, leaving Sinistea on just 7 HP. I switch into Lunatone on Pyro Ball, doing over half, but a Citrus Berry brings Lunatone out of range of another one. Cinderace moves first using Pyro Ball again, and Lunatone survives on just 2 HP. A Headbutt finishes Cinderace off. And next up is Snorlax, and it's one of the scariest Pokemon we can face. Like I said before, the only stat Ditto keeps is its HP. And Snorlax has a base HP stat almost 4 times that of Ditto, meaning there is no way that we can match the damage output Snorlax will deal. Case in point, I switch into Cutiefly as Snorlax uses a Body Slam doing over half. Cutiefly's Body Slam does a little over quarter, and there's no way to get a safe switch, so goodbye Cutiefly. I send out Corsola and use a Body Slam, which also manages to paralyze Snorlax. It also loses its chance to move that turn. This unironically probably saved the run, as now Corsola can outspeed to bring Snorlax down. With Corsola still being healthy, I stay in on Heatmore Slash and hit a Body Slam doing over half. Slash from Heatmore crits and another Body Slam takes it down. I stay on Boltund and Crunch leaves Corsola hanging on 9 HP while Body Slam does over half. Unfortunately, there's not much room to play around crits with moves that can 2-shot, but I switch into Krabby, which I honestly shouldn't have done, and Crunch does over half. And even with the Citrus Berry heal, I'm still in range of another. But Krabby gets to move first and gets us the victory with a Crunch. Looking back, there are a few ways I could have made this more consistent, for example, actually giving one of my Pokemon the Choice Scarf, but one death was probably one of the better outcomes. Onto Melanie, I bring Sinistea, Corsola, Krabby, and Rhyhorn. Frostmoth comes out, but Sinistea gets to move first using Bug Buzz doing over half. Frostmoth hits an Icy Wind despite her Frostmoth having Shield Dust, which nullifies secondary effects from moves. Which she should know, since I'm using her Frostmoth. Sinistea outspeeds again, taking Frostmoth down with another Bug Buzz. Darmanitan's out, and it's terrifying, as it has a massive attack stat and Fire Fang, which considering we can only use the Pokemon Melanie has sent out so far, will always be weak to. I decide I need a safe switch, so Sinistea honorably takes the dive. I send out my Scarfer, Corsola, and it gets off a Fire Fang doing over half, and Darmanitan uses Fire Fang, taking Corsola down in one hit. It wasn't even a crit. I was not expecting this. Darmanitan transforms into Zen mode and Krabby transforms into the new Darmanitan. I've lost my Scarfer, so now all I can do is hope that I win the coin flip, and Krabby outspeeds to hit Fire Fang to bring Darmanitan down. We were 2 turns away from a wipe. Ice Cue's next, and Krabby breaks 2 of its ice heads, then one-shots with Fire Fang, while all Ice Cue does is use a single Icy Wind. Finally, it's Lapras. I switch into Rhyhorn as Lapras uses a Max Geyser, suggesting that Lapras has Shell Armor, which prevents crits. Works for me. And better yet, Rhyhorn moves first, hitting a Hypnosis. Lapras sleeps throughout the remainder of her Dynamax, while Rhyhorn uses Surf. After many turns, a Surf finally takes Lapras down. I had a scare with Darmanitan, but otherwise a pretty easy battle, a stark contrast from my last Shield Nuzlocke. There's another battle with Hob, but this one's easier, with the only casualty being Phalanx, who succumbs to Snorlax's Rampage. This was mainly because I completely forgot to regift the Choice Scarf to one of my Pokemon. Up further, Marnie's waiting to ambush us, and she has a taste for blood. Liepard comes out, and Clobberpuss moves first to hit a Fake Out, flinching Liepard. Fun fact, the only 2 attacks Liepard has is Fake Out and Sucker Punch. It can't use Fake Out anymore, and Sucker Punch has a lower priority than Fake Out, meaning it will always fail. So we can basically keep switching out, using Fake Out each switch, and there's nothing Liepard can do. 5 minutes later, Scrafty comes out. I immediately switch out to Clobberpuss as Scrafty hits a strong Brick Break. It's clear I need a sacrifice, so rest in peace Clobberpuss. I send out Roly-Coly, my new Scarfer, and I take Scrafty down with 2 Brick Breaks. Toxicroak is next, so I switch into Rhyhorn on the Swagger. I stay in moving first, but Rhyhorn hits itself doing almost half. Poison Jab brings it into red. A Poison Jab later, it's clear that Toxicroak has done more damage to us than I have to it, so for some reason I have the bright idea to use Swagger on Toxicroak so I can copy its stats. The next turn, Poison Jab finishes off Pumpkaboo. I send out Roly-Coly, and 2 Poison Jabs later, Toxicroak goes down. I stay on Morpeko, and a single Poison Jab takes it out. Truth be told, I've been pretty liberal with sacking my Dittos, starting to run pretty low now. And the thing is, we don't actually have that many encounters left, so better start being careful. We play charades with Piers, but he doesn't realize that you aren't allowed to mime the words either, so he fights us for calling him out. Piers leads with Intimidate Scrafty, which backfires as Intimidate activates before Eevee transforms, and then Eevee's Intimidate lowers Scrafty's attack. Scrafty starts off with a Sand attack, but Eevee still hits the Brick Break, doing over half. Eevee misses the next Brick Break, getting hit instead, but hits the one after that, bringing Scrafty down. Obstagoon's next, and while I could stay in to hit a Brick Break, I have a bad experience with Obstagoon and fighting moves. I switch out to Rhyhorn and find out that this is going to be a long battle. We both have the same idea to use Obstruct. I test the waters by using Throat Chop, and yeah, we'll be here for a while. After many failed counters and many switches, I decide it's time to attack, and Obstagoon goes for Obstruct. Which is actually a good thing, as the defense drop baits Obstagoon to use Throat Chop, and a counter from Liepard puts an end to Obstagoon. I stay in on Malamar and use a series of Throat Chops to take it down. Piers kindly lets me in on Stun Tank strategy, so I switch to my Scarf for Krogunk. I use a couple of Snarls until I realize how much a Sucker Punch does after being hit with the Screech. I switch into Rhyhorn. After a barrage of Sucker Punches from various parties, Krogunk uses a Snarl to finish off Stun Tank without activating Aftermath. A long battle, but I think it went pretty well. It's my first important battle in a while where I didn't lose any Pokemon. And that didn't last long, however, as I ended up losing 2 of my Dittos to the double battle gauntlet right before Raihan. That doesn't seem like a good omen. For Raihan, I bring Roly-Coly, Rhyhorn, Gossifleur, and Krogunk. Raihan starts off with Flygon and Gigalith and immediately gets off a Breaking Swipe, doing massive damage to Roly-Coly. Unfortunately, Roly-Coly's doesn't do as much because of the attack drop. Rhyhorn hits Flygon with Body Press, and Gigalith sets up Stealth Rocks. This time Roly-Coly moves first, but Breaking Swipe was not enough to get the kill on Flygon, and then of course Flygon to Breaking Swipe crits Roly-Coly, bringing it down. One of the worst crits I've had in recent memory. Not a great start. Gigalith uses Body Press into Rhyhorn, bringing it into red, and then Rhyhorn avenges Roly-Coly with its own Body Press. Raihan sends out Sandaconda, and Gossifleur has a new target to transform into. Gossifleur moves first to use Earth Power on Gigalith, and then gets hit with Glare by Sandaconda. Gigalith takes Rhyhorn out with Body Press, and now my Scarfer is forced to transform into Gigalith, a Pokemon with a base speed of 25. No point beating around the bush, there really isn't anything I can do to win from here. Eventually Earth Power takes Krogunk out, and then a combination of Earth Power and Body Press finishes off Gossifleur, putting an end to this run. Didn't even get to Duraludon. I'll be honest, I didn't really plan too much around this battle. In hindsight, I should have led with my Scarfer, but my thought process was that I should just keep it healthy for later. On to my next run. This time my battle with Kabu goes a lot smoother where Kabu starts using coils. This means that Rock'n'Roller now has to hit all of its bug bites. But that's not an issue, as Smokescreen is not able to bring Rock'n'Roller's accuracy into the negative thanks to the coils it already had set up. But now I'm forced to fight Alistair yet again, and I'm still as terrified. I actually lost my third run here, where I lost multiple speed size, and Alistair actually brought on his good AI. My next attempt goes about the same as my first, where I lose 2 of my Pokemon before Gengar, and sacrifice my third Pokemon to bring out Rock'n'Roller. And Rock'n'Roller is actually able to pull through, winning the speed tie and hitting Hypnosis. A hex later, I get through the dreaded battle a second time. I'm skipping through many battles, but Rock'n'Roller has been a monster this run. I'm honestly not sure what I can do to make this battle more consistent aside from breaking the Pokemon limitation rule, which was actually going to be the plan had I lost this run. It almost feels like with the current rules, the Hypnosis strat is the only viable one. Please let me know in the comments if you have any ideas. And for Piers, this time against his Obstagoon, I realized I didn't really have to do anything but use counter until his counter ran out of power points to avoid any risks. And then all I have to do is whittle his stun tank down with Sucker Punch. Almost there. Okay, now I'll use a Snarl to avoid Aftermath. Oh. Yup, I have no clue how, but I forgot I was using my Scarfer and had ran out of Sucker Punches. Unfortunately, once you press fight, you're then locked into using Struggle, which of course has recoil damage, taking out my beloved Dracovish in the process. And this was entirely avoidable. All the rest of my team was still pretty healthy and I could have switched out any time. I was pretty salty about this for a while, but I forced myself to get over it as we're back where it ended. I've actually managed to keep a lot more Dittos alive this time around, not taking any unnecessary risks and also having a better knowledge on what random battles I actually need to prepare for. I still ended up losing Wingull during the Gauntlet to an Air Slash from Pelipper into a Dragon Pulse from Stagoo, but now we're back to Raihan. I bring Milcery, Pawniard, Litwick, and Rock'n'Roller. This time I actually lead with my Scarfer, Rock'n'Roller, and Pawniard. Rock'n'Roller hits a Breaking Swipe doing over half to Flygon and lowering both of their attacks. Flygon's Breaking Swipe does less this time. Pawniard hits Flygon with Body Press and Gigalith sets up Stealth Rocks. Another Breaking Swipe brings Flygon down, and Pawniard hits Gigalith with the Body Press, and Gigalith does the same. And this time I switch out Rock'n'Roller for Litwick as Sandaconda hits it with Glare. Pawniard wins the speed tie for the third time and takes out Gigalith. And out comes Duraludon. Duraludon Dynamaxes while Sandaconda protects and moves first, knocking Pawniard out with a critical Max Knuckle. I'm convinced that crit mattered. Litwick pushes past Paralysis and hits Duraludon with Glare. Ditto copies stat changes, but not the ones from statuses. Milcery naturally moves first, hitting Duraludon with Body Press and then gets paralyzed by Sandaconda. Duraludon misses a turn thanks to Paralysis, and Litwick manages to hit Earth Power to do massive damage to Duraludon. Sandaconda moves first this time, one-shotting Milcery with Earth Power, and Duraludon uses Max Knuckle on Litwick to do pathetic damage. Litwick yet again pushes past Paralysis to bring down the behemoth Duraludon with Earth Power. We're faced with the double battle quirk we discovered earlier, and Rock'n'Roller has to use a turn to transform into Sandaconda. Sandaconda responds by paralyzing my Scarfer, but that doesn't matter as Litwick doesn't miss and hits Sandaconda with Glare. 3 paralyzed snakes after taking down a giant metal behemoth. I don't remember this sequel to Metal Gear. All snakes push past the first turn of Paralysis, all using Earth Power. Then Sandaconda gets paralyzed, presumably trying to use Protect, as Rock'n'Roller breaks through Paralysis, using Earth Power knocking Sandaconda out and earning us the final badge. This battle went much smoother, and I didn't even really have to rely on luck too much. Even by the end, it's evident that I could have taken a few more hits if Paralysis did get in the way. This may be the final badge, but we're still far from the end. And most important battles from here on out feature Dynamaxing. Fun. Before heading towards Winden, I round up the final few encounters I have for a while, and then I'm forced to sacrifice a Ditto to this Rhydon who's only incentivized to use Bulldoze, which does well over half to any Pokemon that I send out. Beware, appease the Bulldoze gods for rite of passage. Afterwards I could just send out my Scarfer to finish the job. Finally, after reaching Winden, we begin the long Dynamax Gauntlet, starting off with Marnie. For the Champion Cup battles, I'll be using the same rules as gyms, where I bring the same number of Pokemon as my opponent. Marnie once again leads with Liepard, but this time it actually has moves to hit us. I start off using the Fake Out strat while Liepard uses Snarl. But once she uses Nasty Plot, I try to go for a Torment to prevent use of Snarl, completely forgetting that Liepard has Prankster, which causes it to fail since Prankster doesn't work against Dark types. I switch out again on another Nasty Plot. One more Fake Out later, Drifloon is able to win the speed tie, taking out Liepard with Snarl. Scrafty comes out and I need a safe switch, so thank you Drifloon. I send out my Scarfer, who uses Brick Break, then gets hit with Swagger. I try my luck, but Jellicent hits itself and then gets its speed lowered by Scary Face. Into Machop, Scrafty goes for another Scary Face. And back into Jellicent on Scrafty's third Scary Face. Of course, the turn I attack, Scrafty goes for a swagger, but Jellicent pushes past and takes Scrafty down with a brick break. Next up is Toxicroak, and while I like to stay in with my +2 attack Scrafty, I have no good moves to hit it, so I switch, and it turns out Toxicroak has no fighting moves, so I had nothing to worry about. We trade a few hits, then I send in Jellicent as Toxicroak uses swagger. Again, I decide to stay in to test my luck, and once again I get hit, but at least Toxicroak fails his Sucker Punch. I don't really want more of my team taking damage, so I stay in and actually hit the Sucker Punch, while Toxicroak fails another. I get a save switch to Machop as Toxicroak fails its third Sucker Punch. I realize that Sucker Punch is the only physical attack Toxicroak has, so I bring back the old strat and set up a swagger. Toxicroak hits itself, putting it into red. I can now switch back into my Scarfer to copy Toxicroak's stats without the confusion, but Toxicroak uses swagger, making that pointless. I don't risk the confusion this time and switch into Machop, taking the Venoshock, but my Sucker Punch fails again as Toxicroak uses another swagger. I don't see any way to play around this, so I take a risk, and it pays off as Sucker Punch puts an end to Toxicroak. I stay on Morpeko and Machop once again pushes past confusion to hit the Sucker Punch, but leaves Morpeko in red. Morpeko uses Spark and Machop manages to survive. The next turn it snaps out of confusion and finishes Morpeko off with another Sucker Punch. Finally it's a Dynamaxing Grimmsnarl. Unfortunately, no matter which Pokemon I switch into, I'm going to be taking a big hit from Max Starfall. So I decide to stay in, and Machop uses a final Venoshock as it succumbs to a neutral fairy move. I figure the best course of action from here is to send out my Scarfer, who's already on low HP, to use a Spirit Break, lowering the Attack Titan's attack, which also does a lot more damage than I was expecting, but not getting the kill. Goodbye, Jellicent. With this info, if I have to do this fight again, I think Swagger last turn would have been the smarter play. I send out Losad, but it loses the speed tie and also falls to a Max Starfall, but Grimmsnarl returns back to normal. My final Ditto comes out, and Grimmsnarl moves first to use a Bulk Up. The defense boost doesn't help as a final Spirit Break wins us the first match in the Champion Cup. 4 losses in my first match. This doesn't bode well. I definitely saw a few more ways I could have saved 2 more Dittos during this battle, but no time to breathe, on to Hop. The battle starts off with Growlithe using a Body Slam and Double setting up a Cotton Guard. I immediately switch out to Noctowl to take advantage of the defense boost and take a Body Slam. We have a series of Body Slams similar to our tackle-offs from earlier, and yet neither side gets paralyzed. This continues until Hop uses a full restore, getting hit with Body Slam. I try for one last Body Slam, but no paralysis. I switch up my strategy, and as Double uses a Body Slam, leaving Noctowl in red, Noctowl hits with a reversal to take Double out, and the crit helped. Snorlax is next, and I figure it's best to keep my team healthy, so I stay in to use a strong reversal, but it doesn't even do half. Snorlax's Hammer Arm takes Noctowl down. I send out Impidimp, my Scarfer. Hammer Arm brings Snorlax from half into red, and Snorlax's Hammer Arm brings Impidimp down from full health into red. But Scarf allows Impidimp to outspeed, and Snorlax gets squished by Hammer Arm. Pincurchin comes out, and I switch out to preserve the Scarf. Howlucha gets hit with Poison Jab and gets poisoned. I decide to stay in, and Howlucha's Poison Jab poisons Pincurchin. Pincurchin says a bad word. I go for another Poison Jab as Pincurchin can't stop its foul mouth. On autopilot, I go for another Poison Jab, but this works out as Pincurchin, just like a 12-year-old who just learned the F-word, keeps cursing. And Poison keeps it barely alive. And now I can take advantage of the boosts and send out my still healthy Skorupi. But of course, this is the turn that Pincurchin chooses to attack, and Poison Jab also poisons Skorupi. I was actually kind of salty about this at the time. Pincurchin withers away to poison damage. The defense boost means Corviknight can't really do anything and it goes down to a couple of Thunderbolts. Why does this cursed Pincurchin have a special stab move? Finally it's Hop's Ace Cinderace, and this time it can Dynamax. It uses Max Ooze for some reason and Skorupi takes it pretty well. Poison Jab does over half and Skorupi goes down to a Max Flare the turn later. Why did it have to get poisoned? I send out Growlithe and go for a bounce, potentially getting a chance to dodge a turn of Dynamax. But Cinderace moves first to use Max Knuckle. Also, why did Hop teach Cinderace bounce over acrobatics? It's not even holding an item. At least this turn Cinderace once again moves first, missing the Pyro Ball. Bounce just misses the kill. None of Cinderace's moves are accurate, and there's only a 50% chance for me to move first, so I try and use a counter. But I forget that Cinderace has an attack boost, and Pyro Ball Under the Sun one-shots Growlithe without even a crit. I send out my Scarfed Impidimp and it manages to avoid the 10% chance hitting Pyro Ball to end the battle. Also funnily enough, like certain abilities, despite Impidimp now being a Cinderace, the animation for Pyro Ball doesn't recognize that. And that's Hop. 3 more losses. I got pretty unlucky during some parts and I think I could save at least 1 more Ditto consistently if I have to do this again. I've hinted at this, but to come clean, we're running very low on Dittos. We have 2 more encounters coming up, but that's right before the champion. Meaning out of the 14 Dittos we still have breathing, we can only risk 10 of them to have a full team. On average, we've lost 3 Dittos per battle since the Champion Cup began, and we still have 8 big battles to do. This isn't a good situation to be in. I didn't realize it was my encounter count of all things that I needed to worry about. But for now, we're given a break to do one of the most tedious and nonsensical parts of this game. The story makes absolutely no sense. We have no reason to look for Leon. Hop, get food on your own. Why is Oleana even telling us this? Why is Hop so upset? There's literally a cafe upstairs. Anyway, if that wasn't bad enough, we have to go through this elevator to fight Macrocosmos employees who use steel types. Hop decides to use a double despite having Cinderace in the back. And we have Dittos. So after a barrage of not very effective moves from both sides, I figure this would just be faster if I take out double. And Hop sends out Corviknight. Hop's useless. And I'll maintain the opinion that this is better than anything the Johto Rocket campaign had to offer. Anyway, we make it to the top and we have to face Oleana, and she's got a pretty diverse team. Oleana starts right off the bat with Frostless, and Ghost types are still pretty scary to deal with. Frostless immediately goes for Will-O-Wisp, and I do the same. I switch out to my Scarfer as Frostless hits a Hex to do a lot of damage. But Frostless is burned, so Impidim's Hex takes it out. Salazzle's out, so I too switch out as Salazzle burns my berry with Incinerate. I didn't realize that you kept the burn status even if you transform into a fire type. Wooloo uses Dragon Pulse as Salazzle does the same, but the weakened Wooloo can't handle the extra damage. After another exchange of Dragon Pulses, Palpitoad's berry allows it to survive one more so it can finish Salazzle off. And now it's Milotic, who was the one I was dreading. I decide the best course of action is to sacrifice Palpitoad to use Poison Gas. This may seem unnecessary, but see, Milotic has one attacking move, Surf. Milotic is fairly bulky, Ditto is not. And to top it off, Milotic has Recover, so we're going to be here for a while. I'll take any extra damage I can get. I take this as an opportunity to recover the health of my own Pokemon, and 15 minutes later, Milotic goes down. And now Zarina, a Grass type. As a Grass type against a Water Pokemon, you would go for your stab super effective move, right? Especially if said move is a signature move. So I switch out to my Scarfer and transform into Zarina myself. And Zarina uses Acrobatics. I can never tell if this game's AI is extremely smart or just dumb. Impidim's Acrobatics does far less as it's holding a Choice Scarf, and another Acrobatics finishes it off. I send out Bronzor, who I conveniently forgot to give a berry to, and now a boosted Acrobatics takes Zarina down. And finally it's the Ace Garbodor. I immediately switch out on the Max Malador, which also activates Weak Armor. I get a chance to use Stomping Tantrum, but a Max Quake puts a quick stop to Slowpoke. Thanks to the earlier defense drop and a crit, another Stomping Tantrum puts Garbodor down. Right after saying that I need to preserve my Dittos, I lose a third of them. It almost feels like Oleana's team was built to counter my team of Dittos. She has a surprisingly diverse team, and each team member can counter the last. We still have the actual real Champion Cup, and coincidentally the trainers that we have to fight are the ones that we struggle the most against. Well, first we need to fight Beat again. Beat's Mawile has Intimidate, which means you can always have a higher attack stat than it. After a series of Iron Heads, Mawile goes down. Gardevoir comes out and I try to use an Iron Head, but Psychic does a lot. I realize that Gardevoir actually has a recovery option, that being Wish, so I go for that, as Gardevoir has the same idea. I keep using Wishes, then it seems that Gardevoir gives up and starts using Calm Mind, which opens up a win condition. I keep spamming Wishes until Gardevoir sets up all the Calm Minds it can. I use Litwick to bring Gardevoir's health low, then switch into my Scarfer. After which a Dazzling Gleam takes Gardevoir down. And Rapidash can't do anything to stop a +6 Dazzling Gleam. Hatterene manages to survive the first Dazzling Gleam, but Calm Mind also increases special defense, so Max Flare does nothing in return. Another Dazzling Gleam brings Hatterene down. It's been a while since I haven't lost any Dittos. Deja vu. But now the actual tough fights begin. Nessa leads with Golisopod. Litwick moves first using a first impression, but Golisopod goes for a sword stance. Litwick gets to move again using Shadow Claw, and Golisopod makes a tactical retreat, losing its stat boosts. Next up is Pelipper, so I switch out and Pelipper sets up Tailwind. We trade a series of Air Slashes, but then Pelipper starts stalling by using Roosts. Pelipper is now in red, so I take this chance to switch out, but Nessa uses a full restore. Citrus Berry keeps Litwick healthy, and Pelipper resets Tailwind, allowing us to use one more Air Slash to take Pelipper out. Barraskewda's out, and Liquidation does a lot, and Air Slash does over half. I want to keep Pelipper a bit longer, so I go for a Roost, but Liquidation lowers Litwick's defense. But luckily Rain ended at that very moment, and Throat Chop doesn't kill, allowing Litwick to use a Tailwind as the opposition side's pieces out. I try to use a roost to gain more HP, but I figure it's not worth risking the crit and use an air slash to take Barraskewda down. With Seeking Out, I've run out of air slashes, so I set up a Tailwind and switch into Corsola on Waterfall. Corsola manages to win the jousting contest with Mega Horn thanks to a Citrus Berry, and we've made it to Dreadnought with all Dittos alive. I figure I need a safe switch, so goodbye Corsola. That crit was a bit overkill. Mr. Mime doesn't win the speed tie and it acts as another sacrifice. Litwick actually wins the speed tie to do some useful damage, but this also marks the end of its road. But now Dreadnought's back to normal and we still have 2 healthy Pokemon. I send out Golett and it moves first, bringing Dreadnought below half, but Dreadnought's liquidation does way more and also lowers Golett's defense. I switch into my Scarfer and Dreadnought's liquidation brings Berserker under half. Berserker moves first and liquidation wins us the first battle. 3 more losses. I think I just have to accept that I'm not having a full team for the champion. Hell, even thinking about the champion may be a bit too ambitious considering my next battle. Because of course we had to fight Alistair yet again. But at least this time I have something that resembles a plan. The first Pokemon out is Dusknoir. Golett moves first to hit a Shadow Punch and Dusknoir lowers its speed with Rock Tomb. I know a Shadow Punch is coming up, so I use Disable. Alistair tries to copy my strat, but the absolute fool disables my Disable. And I just go for another Shadow Punch which crits, managing to take Dusknoir out. I actually didn't want this, I was also hoping Alistair would use his full restore here. Chandelure is out and I don't see a safe switch, so goodbye Golett. I send out my Scarfer and Berserker's Shadow Ball one-shots Chandelure. Poltergeist's out and this is where my mastermind plan begins. But this too involves some luck. I switch out to Bronzor and Poltergeist goes straight for the Shadow Ball. I go for a Protect, but at this health I'm only going to be able to bait Shadow Balls, so sorry Bronzor. I send out Roggenrola, still at full health, go for Protect, and Poltergeist uses Nasty Plot. Perfect. I was actually going to sack Roggenrola here, but after a couple of Protects and another Nasty Plot, I realized I couldn't do it. Roggenrola has been critical for so many important battles and I've had it for so long. Also has the most HP out of all of my Dittos, but that's just a bonus. I send out Howlucha and it valiantly goes down to a Shadow Ball. Now I send out Berserker, the Scarfer, and it's over. A +4 Shadow Ball one-shots Poltergeist. A +4 Shadow Ball puts down Corsola. But there's still a question I was avoiding. Can a Scarfed Poltergeist outspeed Gengar? And it turns out it can. A +4 Shadow Ball brings Gengar down in one hit, winning us our second champion battle. I lost 3 Dittos, but I honestly think that's the best it could have gotten, and I was actually very happy with the outcome. But now I'm faced with the dilemma. Our last fight is against Raihan. Raihan uses Dragon Pokemon, and like Ghost, Dragon is super effective against itself. But here's the thing. Forget the champion. We don't even have a full team for Raihan. How am I even supposed to win this? Raihan starts off with Torkoal and we have a long slow-paced battle using Lava Plume and Yawns. Since I'm actually able to switch out my Pokemon and with the power of Citrus Berries, I'm able to win this fight with a final Body Press. But now the real battle begins as Flygon's out and my team has already taken a bit of damage. At least I get a free switch as Flygon goes for an Earthquake on my Scarfer who's copied its Levitate ability. Dreepy moves first using Dragon Claw to just miss the kill and Flygon goes for Sandstorm? Huh, that was a free kill. But next up is Turtonator, who can likely take me out with 1 Dragon Pulse. I use a Dragon Claw to do over half, and Turtonator uses Sunny Day, another free kill. But now it's Goodra, a pseudo-legendary who can easily take out Flygon in 1 hit. Dreepy uses a Dragon Claw to bring Goodra into red, and Goodra uses Rain Dance. Raihan proving that weather isn't busted in Nuzlocke. Dreepy's actually stayed alive long enough to use up all of its Dragon Claws. I switch into my own pseudo-legendary as Goodra hits Surf, allowing Tyranitar to activate his Citrus Berry. And as it turns out, Goodra has no dragon moves whatsoever. In fact, it has 2 water moves. Why? Goodra misses a Muddy Water and Tyranitar Surf puts an end to Goodra. But now it's the Dynamaxing Duraludon, and despite going well so far, here's where it could all go wrong. I figure I might as well stay in to get a safe switch, and Tyranitar gets obliterated by Max Depletion. Berserker gets to move first, doing some damage with Body Press, and Duraludon uses Max Knuckle. But Berserker just barely manages to stay alive. Berserker fulfills its honorable role to end Duraludon's Dynamax by taking a final Max Knuckle, and then a well-deserved rest. I send my still healthy Scarfer back out and it uses Body Press, revealing that we've basically won the battle. Not just with an incomplete team, but also with 2 Dittos still alive. Are you f***ing serious? There is absolutely no way, even with the +2 attack, that Duraludon would have one-shot Dreepy from 4 without a crit. I send out Roggenrola, Duraludon moves first to use Dragon Claw, and Roggenrola survives. Another Body Press bringing Duraludon down and winning us the second phase of the Champion Cup. I take it back, this is probably the worst time crit I've had in a long time. We were just about to pull through with 2 Dittos, and now we only have 1. We do get another one in a bit, but I'm going to be honest, I don't think the next battle is even possible with 2 Dittos, let alone the champion with 3. And that's assuming that they all stay alive during the next arc. I was close to breaking my rules, to just visit the Isle of Armor to get some extra encounters, but I've made it so far without needing to go down that route. So instead I decided to suck up my pride and looked up a Nuzlocke guide to see if there's any encounters that I might have missed. And as entertaining as it might be to see me struggle with 1 Ditto, there are in fact 2 encounters that I missed that fit within my rule set. The first one is actually one I didn't realize counted as an encounter. If you played any of the Let's Go games and have saved data on your Switch, you can talk to these people here to get either a Pikachu or an Eevee. And it turns out that they in fact have a unique encounter location, the Wild Area Station, which I don't think any other wild Pokemon can get. And the second Pokemon is probably a Pokemon that I've only ever fought once during my initial playthrough and have completely forgotten about since. In Turffield, once you can ride your bike on water, you can go down this river next to the bridge and run into a Crawdaunt. This is the only Pokemon that you can get in Turffield, and indeed has the catch location of Turffield. I've never had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to get any encounter I can before. 5 Pokemon isn't as good as 6, but it's still far better than 3, and I actually think I have a shimmer of hope to make it the champion now. Though before doing anything else, I actually had a realization that I'm honestly kicking myself for not having done sooner. Since getting access to the wild area, we technically have an access to infinite money without risking any Pokemon. Basically, you could just go around collecting lots from dens, waiting a day once you've collected them all, then repeat. From here, you can either buy things from traders, or better yet, use Watts on the Digging Duo to get items which you can then sell for money. Once you reach Winden, in the Pokemon Center, you have access to a vendor that sells you vitamins for money. In Gen 8, Game Freak added a quality of life feature where you can now use vitamins to max out your stats. And as the one stat that Ditto keeps when it transforms is HP. You can see where I'm going. I typically don't like to do this, especially since I use rare candies and not having EVs is a good trade-off, but for this particular challenge, I think I deserve this. I grab Orbeetle from the Slumbering Weald, max out my Ditto's HP, and we're ready to fight Rose with our 4 Ditto and my rough plan. First up is Escavalier. Orbeetle starts off with Swords Dance as Escavalier hits Mega Horn. Drill Run does over half, and another Mega Horn activates Citrus Berry. The next Mega Horn misses, and Orbeetle uses Drill Run to take Escavalier out. Next is Klinklang, outspeeding to use a Wild Charge, and a single Drill Run takes it down. Now it's Ferrothorn. I was kind of hoping that I'd be at more HP since now I'm not sure if it sees a kill. I switch out to Crawdaunt as Ferrothorn curses. Perfect. I use a curse as Ferrothorn goes for a body press as it was at +1. But now I can begin basing curses by using my own. Eventually, while Ferrothorn's at +4, I decide to switch to Pikachu for more health. But that's the turn that Ferrothorn goes for another body press. Once again, we go back to basing curse, and now both sides are at max attack and defense. Now the plan was that I'll do some damage with Pikachu so my next healthy Pokemon would have an easier time. But body press does a lot more than I was expecting, and then the damage from Iron Barbs takes Ferrothorn out, leaving Pikachu on not much HP. I still have a chance, but now a single crit from either of the next 2 Pokemon would be bad. Berserker uses Throat Chop, not getting a crit, and Body Press takes it out. Copperajah Dynamaxes using a Max Quake, and it doesn't get a crit. A +6 Body Press is able to bring Copperajah down in one hit, getting us past Rose without losing a single Pokemon. But it isn't over yet. We still have to fight Eternatus, and it's a Dragon type, which is already scary, but its first form has a base HP of 140, almost 3 times that of Ditto. And the Eternamax one has a base HP of 255, 5 times that of Ditto, and it's in permanent Dynamax. I send up my Scarfer and hit with a Dynamax cannon that very literally misses the kill by a roll, but luckily Eternatus goes for cross poison. Another Dynamax cannon takes Eternatus out. There was a coin flip on whether I'd lose Roggenrola or not, as I believe this phase has the random move AI. As Eternatus transforms into a world-ending abomination, Hop has a dumbass grin on his face, making me wonder if I bullied him a little too much. But we have the power of God and anime on our side, as some wolf deities fight alongside us, transforming into stronger versions through some anime magic. All Pokemon flex their abilities as Roggenrola transforms into Eternatus. Roggenrola can move first thanks to the Scarf, and uses a Dynamax Cannon, which is not only super effective, but also does double the damage to Dynamaxed opponents. Zacian sets up a Howl, and Zamazenta sets up Light Screen, which saves us as Eternatus uses Max Wormwood on Roggenrola but doesn't do nearly as much as it could have. Double does his best. Another Dynamax Cannon brings Eternatus to just about half, and Zacian and Zamazenta use their signature moves to do a lot of damage each. Thankfully, Eternatus decides to use Max Flare on Zamazenta this time. One more Dynamax cannon into Behemoth Blade brings Eternatus down, and with Hop's permission, we can catch our final Ditto. I usually ban legendaries, but I think I can make an exception for this challenge. And that was far easier than my level 100 hardcore Nuzlocke. Probably because I actually kept Zacian and Zamazenta alive this time. And to my surprise, I've actually managed to keep all my remaining Dittos alive through this arc. Against many odds, we did something that I truly had lost all hope for. We actually reached the champion. For my final battle, I bring Orbeetle, the Ditto, Pikachu, the Ditto, Crawdaunt, the Ditto, Eternatus, the Ditto, and last but not least, Roggenrola, the Ditto. Let's see how these 5 fare against the champion. Leon leads with Aegislash and I send out my Scarfer, Roggenrola. This may seem a bit early for it, but based on our previous observations with Morpeko and Mimikyu, I'm assuming stance change won't work for Ditto, so this seemed like the only consistent option. Roggenrola starts off with a Shadow Ball doing about a third as Aegislash changes stance, doing the same, but naturally doing more damage. But now that Aegislash is in attack stance, Roggenrola's next Shadow Ball is able to take Aegislash out. Next up is Haxorus, which is the first Pokemon I'm concerned about. I send out Crawdaunt to take the Earthquake, and all I can really do is hope that it wins the speed tie, which it doesn't. Goodbye, Crawdaunt. I send out Pikachu, who's holding her Banberry. Pikachu being able to outspeed would be big, but it doesn't. However, it survives the outrage and uses its own to put Haxorus down. Dragapult's out, and since Pikachu didn't win the last speed tie, it goes down to Shadow Ball. I send out Orbeetle. I once again lose the speed tie, but that doesn't matter as Orbeetle's holding a Focus Sash. But even that doesn't matter as it survives on 3 HP. And this is actually bad because that means my own Shadow Ball won't get the kill. But the game has mercy on me as Orbeetle finally wins us a speed tie and finishes off Dragapult with another Shadow Ball. Next up is Rillaboom, so Orbeetle goes for a Flamethrower doing over half, and it also burns. Rillaboom hits a Drum Beating to give Orbeetle some well-deserved rest. Only 2 Pokemon left. I send out my Scarfer, and thanks to the burn damage, Roggenrola is able to use Drum Beating to slap Rillaboom out of existence. The reason I went for a Drum Beating is because now Rhyperior is out, but even though Drum Beating is 4 times effective, I'm not sure if it kills. But it is in fact a one-hit KO, marking an early grave for Rhyperior. And finally the Ace Charizard's out, and despite being a Charizard, Leon's one is pretty threatening, and with only 2 Dittos alive, I'm not too confident. I switch into Eternatus as Charizard begins to Dynamax, and then goes for G-Max Wildfire, not doing too much damage. But as Eternatus was holding a Focus Sash, our chances of winning or losing comes down to a coin flip. And Eternatus manages to win, getting off an Ancient Power doing just over half. A Max Rockfall is what it takes to take Eternatus down. But the question is, was Ancient Power a roll? I send out my Scarf Roggenrola, use an Ancient Power, and Roggenrola proves why it's my ace as a crit, putting an end to Charizard and the Nuzlocke. I was on the edge of my seat for that one. Looking over the footage, it's clear that Ancient Power didn't need the crit to kill, especially considering the Sandstorm damage. But by this point, I was so done with this challenge that everything looked threatening. It came down to a coin flip at the end of the day, but doing this battle once gave me a better idea on how I could distribute my items to make this a lot more consistent. Not to mention how much having 1 extra Ditto could have helped. Honestly, one of the most fun and difficult hardcore Nuzlocke variants I've done, and I highly recommend that you should try it. There were many long tedious battles and some that relied on luck, but I think most of that had to do with me using a limited team during my gym battles, which I assume most people don't follow. But man, this challenge drains you. Through the power of editing, I removed a lot of random trainer battles and shortened some very long important ones, but that doesn't change the fact that I actually had to go through them every single time I lost a run. I think overall I made many battles as consistent as I could have, but admittedly I'm not the best at this game, so please let me know if you have any ideas for any of the battles. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give me some of that sweet validation through a like so I can justify why I spent 3 whole weeks doing this challenge, and I hope you stick around for a future video.